that capture a billion.
Thanks for joining us on Parlance. This is Bloomberg Quint. I'm Harsha Subramaniam.
Good afternoon. I'm Meera Dugal. Let's get you the headlines. Range-bound trade continues on Dalal Street. Nifty falls below the 10,750 mark, dragged by weakness on metal and tech stocks.
The government and the RBI find some middle ground at the central bank's board's meeting. The regulator will form a committee to look into the central bank's economic capital framework and the prompt corrective action mechanism.
The spate of resignations at Yes Bank continues. Former NASSCOM chief R. Chandrasekhar steps down, saying he was not comfortable with what was happening.
Shapoorji Pallonji will make its debut on the bourses with its solar firm. Other businesses like Eureka Forbes may follow. That's a Bloomberg News exclusive.
And it's the second phase of polling in Chhattisgarh, with voters in 72 assembly seats choosing among their over 1,000 candidates.
A few conversations lined up on the RBI board meeting today with economist and columnist C.S. Srinivas Raghavan and Rajneesh Singhvi of SME Consulting will join us a little later on the show. But first, it's been a day of range-bound trade. Neeraj is here with a closer look of some of those stocks that have been moving. Neeraj.
Afternoon, guys. So yeah, 0.5% down for the benchmark index, and the volumes today marginally higher than what happened in trade yesterday. By the way, remember yesterday, post the rupee strength, we had some volume pickup in our markets in yesterday's session as well in the last half an hour, but nothing to thwart off what would have happened otherwise. But in today's session on the FNO side, there has been decent enough volumes. Let's see if they build on and able to cross the volumes in the session yesterday. The market breadth obviously is a bit tepid compared to what we saw in trade in yesterday's session. So the advanced decline ratio will give you a picture which is not the prettiest, but frankly, the large caps and the broader market breadth not as terrible as one would have otherwise believed. What's not doing well? Well, technology, and naturally so, has lost some bit of ground, though I must add that yesterday, despite the rupee strength, the tech stocks were holding out okay, but in today's session not so much. So the likes of Tech Mahindra, TCS and some of the others have pulled back. The Nifty IT is down about 1.5%, and then the metal names. So Hindalco is down, Jindal Steel is down, Tata Steel is down. That entire clutch of metal names too have corrected and corrected quite significantly in trade today. So those are the two pockets which are down, and Yes Bank arguably is amongst the top losers. In fact, the top loser on the Nifty, 5.5% lower in the session today as well. So that stock, not as well. It was high yesterday, but down about 5% in the session today. And by the way, non-index Jet Airways continues to grind lower. But interestingly, as has been the trend the last few days, the consumption-focused names, which had corrected quite strongly, are all seeing bounce back. So Page Industries, 2 days on a trot, has gained. It corrected from 70 times to 52 times FY20 EPS, and after that, 2 days on a trot, it has gone up. We've seen, remember, similar moves happening with Eicher Motors, from going down all the way to 21,000 to bouncing back to 25. Maruti from 6,500 all the way to 73, 7,400. Titan is bounced back from 800 to 930. So some of those consumption-focused names are finding some favor. And GAIL, after correcting quite strongly over the last 1 month, from the index that is, GAIL after correcting quite strongly for the last few months, last 1 month rather, has pulled back some steam. So 2.5% on the back of the brokerage note that has come out today.
All right, Neeraj, thanks so much for that. Just giving you a read on the RBI government turf war that had been playing out. Well, the Central Board meeting finished late in the evening yesterday. It seems to be some give and take on both sides, but on the crucial issues, the Reserve Bank of India has not given in yet, so there is no decision to transfer any of the reserves. There is a committee that is going to be set up to review the economic capital framework. The membership of that committee is still to be announced, although I'd like to point out that the past committees on this were entirely internal. This one will have external members as well. On the other issues, there is a restructuring scheme for SMEs that is likely to be considered by the RBI. The RBI has given some ground on extending the Basel requirements, a part of the Basel requirements, which is the capital conservation buffer. The timeline for implementing that has been stretched out by a year from 2019 to 2020. On prompt corrective action, there is no external committee that they're referring it to. What they're doing is they're sending it to the board committee which is the committee which reviews these regulations, and they will take a relook to see whether any changes are required to the prompt corrective action framework. Let's go across and get a view in on this, who won, who lost, although the broader take from some of the economists this morning has been that at least the worst has been averted. Joining us right now is TCA Srinivas Raghavan, columnist and author. He's joining us here on Bloomberg Quint. TCA, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. First thoughts, what did you make of the RBI statement released after the board meet?
If you're honest about it, the government capitulated. I think basically the Reserve Bank won the day. There were three issues, and on each of them no decision was taken yesterday. I don't know what they were doing for 10 hours. But if at the end of the day it's this kind of decision had to be taken, then it could have been done in a much shorter space of time. So basically I think the RBI won the day. The Finance Ministry has had to pull back quite a lot. They will set up this committee and so on. So let's see. I mean, that's way down the road. 25 crores or whatever it is for MSMEs and for the banks, PCA and all that. I would think that both sides have acted sensibly, in as much as the government has not insisted on taking a hammer to crack a nut. So that's my take on it for the moment, anyway.
TCA, the committee that the Economic Capital Framework has been referred to, is that fair in your view? Also, haven't the past committees been internal? So are you comfortable with the fact that this is going to be a committee jointly nominated?
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter now. I mean, you have a committee and it doesn't matter who puts the members there as long as the members know what they're talking about. And to my mind, the real conflict or whatever, controversy or debates or friction or whatever you want to call it, within that committee will arise when they sit down and assess the likely risk to the financial sector and within that to the banks over the coming years. And I've just tweeted this morning that what if the committee, on a fair assessment of the risks in the coming years, decides that the Reserve Bank actually needs more rather than less reserves? Then what happens? So this notion that it has got too much reserves, the benchmark is what some of the other central banks in the world have. The benchmark is not the risk to the Indian financial system, particularly because 70% or whatever of these banks, they are in government control. 11 of them are under PCA. More are likely to go under if some of the things that have been done, both by the UPA and the NDA governments, come to their logical conclusion. Now, one argument is that you cannot overestimate risk to the Indian banking system because they are owned by the sovereign and therefore they are not likely to go under. But going under is a very extreme thing. Banks, I think the last bank to have closed down before 2008 was in 1974 in Germany or somewhere. But banks don't close down. In America, they close down the small commodities banks and so on. But in general, the central banks don't allow banks to shut down. So what does that mean? You have to make sure that the bank remains afloat. How do you do that? You do that by giving it money. If you have the money, you give it. If you don't have the money, you print the notes and give it. And this is the thing about snatching a bit of the RBI's contingency reserves also, is that it's not something which is kept in a safe or in a godown or something. At the end of the day, when that book entry transfer is made, the RBI will have to print notes. So it's a form of it is deficit financing. Why is it a form of? It's just plain simple deficit financing. So instead of getting to your nose this way, you're going around this way. That's about the size of it. So I think coming back to the committee will have to take a very clear view on exactly what the risks to the system is. And until we do that, we honestly don't know how much reserves the RBI needs.
TC, assuming this is a very technical committee which has to go into a number of issues, it may take months perhaps to come out with a recommendation. Then the conversation doing the rounds about this money being used for either this year's fiscal deficit or some sort of pre-electoral promise, that conversation goes out of the window.
Yeah, I don't think there's any politics involved in this, except to the extent that the government might have wanted to spend a bit more before the election, and they didn't have the elbow room for that. If they wanted to keep the fiscal deficit at 3.2 or whatever percent, but there's nothing holy about that level. Very few people remember or understand this, that the 3% figure was picked out of the blue by the IMF in 1982 or 83. It has no sanctity in economics. It has no sanctity in commerce. It has no sanctity in anything. It's just that the markets needed a benchmark figure, and they said, okay, let's make it 3%. India has managed to do pretty well with pretty high deficits, 6%, 6.5%, and the heavens haven't come crashing down. So the problem is not the level. I don't know why the NDA government is so hung up on this number. It's become, what in Hindi is called like some kind of mooch ki ladai, that I will hold on to this. If you go to 4%, what's going to happen? It's not as if all the capital is already going out anyway, even with your commitment to 3.2% and whatever. So just if they want to spend a bit more before an election, and which is a fair thing, which happens in every country, just go ahead and print some notes. I was telling some people yesterday that one of the biggest mistakes that was made was to completely phase out the ad hoc treasury bills. See, they provided a comfort level to the government, which is very necessary for any government, and to have completely stopped them or limited them, that was not a very clever thing to have done. Because you can be in different kinds of holes. A government can find itself. Suppose, forget all this, forget election, forget all of these things. Just imagine if there's a huge natural calamity. And you need to spend 30, 40,000 crores for rehabilitation or whatever. And at the same time, you want to stick to 3.2% or 3.5% fiscal deficit. What are you going to do? So I think we need to be a bit more sensible about these rigid IMF disciplines. And on that point, I would, Guru Murthy is articulating it badly, and he's making it a West versus us kind of thing. But what your needs are have to be determined by you. They cannot be determined on some global benchmark. Look at China. Does anybody care what kind of practices China follows? So I think to that extent, some good will come out of this, because we will assess things more sensibly without any great repercussions. Y.V. Reddy, when he set up that committee, the Usha Thorat thing, and they came up with that 12%, where did that 12% come from? It came out of Dr. Reddy's head, I think. Why 12? Why not 11.3, So I don't know. I think we just need to be more sensible.
All right. TC, on the issue of some of the banking stuff, the extension of the capital conservation buffer deadline, PCA being referred to the committee of the board. Don't want to get into the individual issues, but does it not look like that the board is going to be a lot more involved in some of these routine decisions? Is that a good thing? These are all executive decisions.
Yes and no. That's an extremely complicated issue. I don't want to get into the entire history of boards of central banks and so on, but the fact is that India is the only country where the governor has been invested with powers, and not legally, by tradition and convention, by powers that he should not have. The level of consultation with the board tends to be minimal. Partly that's because the kind of people that the government nominates to the board. But before 1949, when RBI was nationalized, the board used to be very active. And in fact, it was so active that the British felt it necessary to have their own man as the governor. And his job was not so much to, there was the whole business of money supply and so on, monetary stability, all the rest of it. But a very important part of his job was to keep the board in check. And that was because the board had various interests being represented over there. And what the board wanted could often be at variance with what the British needed for their own purposes. So, post-nationalization, it's become a practice to assume that the board is just one of those things, dummy thing, and the governor has all the powers. But that's not the way it should be. You and I have both worked in newspapers. It's the same relationship between the group of editors who meet and the editor. It's not as if the group of editors has a overarching power over what is to be published or written the next day, but the editor listens. In the RBI, I'm afraid this has not been happening to the extent it's necessary. Meetings used to be over in 1 hour, 1.5 hours. The discussions were perfunctory. Papers were sent, just before the meeting and so on. Members, I know RBI board members who used to regard it as a big bore, reading those things. So, and these were pretty distinguished people. It's not as if they were some, chaps off the road. So yes, to answer your question, the board should be involved more actively. But the board cannot direct the governor to do anything, because for that there's an entirely, as you know, different procedure laid down. So I hope these guys will change the way the RBI has been functioning in the last 60, 70 years. As a kind of a governor's thing. I've been writing this for a long time, that this is not the way to do it. You do need to consult others. The fact that the governor consults only the finance ministry and he doesn't consult the board, that's not a good thing, is it? The board is there for a purpose.
All right, TCA, thanks so much for joining us on that discussion. That's the broader view of who won, who lost broadly, to put it truly, Harsha.
All right. The Reserve Bank of India's board also had advised it to consider a scheme for restructuring of small bad loan accounts up to 25 crore. How much of a relief does this bring to the SME sector? Rajneesh Singhvi, Director at SME Consulting, now joins us on the show. Rajneesh, thank you so much for joining us. What have you made of this? Firstly, what is the extent of the problem that the SMEs are facing, and does this, in a sense, mitigate some of that problem?
SME definitely is facing a lot of problem in India. Optimism level are really down. Few SMEs which are in leadership position in the country or in their respective sector are definitely performing well, but other SMEs are really facing the brunt of the various initiatives and global recession as well. Various initiatives of the government which probably didn't work out so well, as everybody says, demonetization and GST. These have caused problems for SME sector, but yes, green shoots are visible. What has happened in last 2-3 years, that liquidity problem has really come up like never came like that in past before. Hardly any cases were there in 2008 also. So few sectors had been affected, but presently it appears that yes, liquidity problem is affecting the businesses, and then optimism levels are down. Then employment creation, what was expected by the government, is not happening. So, and banking sector, especially when PNB scandal, then our IL&FS problem came up.
Okay.
So
Rajneesh,
banks also became.
Rajneesh,
Yes.
specifically the proposal of the RBI board to restructure loans up to 25 crore. Do you think that will help mitigate some of these issues that you're talking about?
Yes, definitely. If it is implemented in letter and spirit, of course, the restructuring framework has not been put into place. This was discussed yesterday in the meeting. Yesterday, and RBI must be coming up with the structuring proposal. So we would have to see the how it is framed up. But yes, because the intent is clear that they wish to extend help to the SME sector for restructuring. It is very timely and rather welcome that government is thinking into those lines.
Okay, Mr. Singhvi, thank you so much for joining us today. That's a view on what the SMEs are thinking. I mean, wait for the framework to play out.
All right, let's move beyond the RBI. Yes Bank, the stock is reeling under pressure. The board continues to see exits. Former NASSCOM chief R. Chandrasekhar has resigned as independent director, saying that he's concerned about the recent events of the company. He didn't elaborate though. Saloni Shukla of Bloomberg News joins us with the details. Saloni.
The spate of exits continue at Yes Bank. Yesterday was the third high-profile exit from the Yes Bank board. R. Chandrasekhar, the former telecom secretary, resigned from the board. He also spoke to Bloomberg and said that he was unhappy with the developments that had taken place. He did not elaborate on the developments that he was unhappy about, but clearly the recent exit suggests that the board was unhappy with the developments that had taken place. Remember, on November 14th, the non-executive chairman Ashok Chawla had resigned, and a day after that the former SBI chairman, who was part of the fresh CEO search and selection committee, had also resigned. And all the reasons that the Yes Bank gave was the fact that there were personal reasons behind all these resignations. So there have so far been 3 high-profile exits from the bank board. Remember, O.P. Bhatt was part of the CEO search and selection committee after the Reserve Bank of India said that the bank needed to go through a leadership overhaul, and that is happening. About 10 names that have been given to the board, and now there will be new members inducted to the Yes Bank board, and they will deliberate on who the new CEO will be. Back to you.
Saloni, thank you for that. Patanjali has lost the coveted crown of being the fastest growing consumer company in India. The Baba Ramdev promoted FMCG company saw its revenue decline in the last fiscal year after 6 years. What's hurt this company? Charlene D'Souza is standing by with some answers.
Okay. Patanjali's standalone revenue, that is for its FMCG business, witnessed a decline of 10.6% in FY18. Now, the reason for that being is because the company has faced issues at its distribution end because they were not able to adjust post the implementation of GST. Now, this is the first time since FY 2013 that the company has witnessed a decline in its revenues. Now, distributors that Bloomberg Quinn spoke to said that the company is sitting with inventory, and also there's a delay in the time that the company sends stock. Also, the stock that is sent by the company to the distributors is close to expiry. However, Patanjali is working on fixing its flaws. In the last 2 years, the company has undertaken debt-led expansion, majorly due to increased overheads and for ongoing expansions, that is growing seller and distribution expenses, advertising and promotion expenses, and also increased dealer discounts. It is also working on integrating technology in order to make sure that there is sufficient supply only to the extent of demand.
All right, thanks so much for that, Charlene. Moving on, the Shapoorji Pallonji Group is contemplating its first ever IPO. The 40,000 crore group is looking to list its solar engineering arm, says the group's executive director, who spoke to Bhuma Srivastava of Bloomberg News. Bhuma, thanks for joining us here. What have you picked up first?
So the group is on a rare asset sale drive. one of which will be like a 1 billion IPO plus pre-IPO kind of deals struck on the solar arm within Sterling and Wilson. It's a privately held company of the group. That is one. The other element which they're contemplating is hiving off and listing Eureka Forbes, the water purifiers that we've all grown up drinking from, as part of the Forbes & Company. So there's a feeling that there's a lot of value within Forbes & Company. Eureka Forbes could be more than the parent itself. Hiving off listing is one of the options they're considering. And the final piece in the broader asset sale is the real estate monetization. Selling land parcels or maybe retail spaces, developing malls in association with partners. That's a broader kind of an asset monetization program the group is looking to embark on.
Big picture, what do they plan to do with these proceeds? Are they entering new businesses, diversifying?
So the broad picture that we picked up is that they're looking to reduce debt. What the group ED told us that they have levered to a point that's sustainable. Beyond that, they need to bring in the equity element to keep the ratios in balance. So part of it will go towards debt reduction and the other bit will be growth capital.
Uma, thank you so much for that. Let's move on. Nissan will oust long-serving boss Carlos Ghosn after he was arrested for financial crimes, including underreporting his salary. This marks an abrupt downfall of one of the automobile industry's most feted executives. Let's now listen into what the Nissan CEO Hiroto Saikawa had to say.
He actually misrepresented the compensation amount in the Tokyo Stock Exchange Securities report that was less than the actual amount, and misrepresenting the purpose of spending the company's investment. That's the second one. And the third one, he used the company's asset for personal use. These are the three categories of misconduct that are uncovered, and we acknowledged these facts. I am unable to talk about details of the contents, but needless to say, this is the act which cannot be tolerated by the company. And our experts, the experts judge that this gives an enough reason for dismissal. This is a serious misconduct. That's the specialist evaluation. Therefore, we decided to propose dismissal of him to the board of directors.
So with Carlos gone, is the glue that held the Nissan-Renault-Mitsubishi alliance together? Dave McCombs, Asia Companies editor at Bloomberg News, joins us from our studios in Tokyo to answer that question. Dave, thanks so much for joining in. So will this partnership be able to survive?
There are doubts about that. You know, as you mentioned, Ghosn was kind of the glue holding this together. He essentially built this alliance piece by piece, adding companies, rescuing Mitsubishi, rescuing Nissan, and finding ways that the companies could work together, share technology, share production, do the sorts of things, make the tough sort of decisions that allow an alliance like this to proceed. You know, each of these companies has their own brands, their own vehicles that they make, and their own management, their own operations. So combining them can be very difficult. You need a powerful force that can make the tough decisions and make them stick, really. Someone like Ghosn, you need that to guide an alliance like this. Now, having said that, the commercial logic for this kind of alliance is clear, and that doesn't change regardless of what happens to Ghosn. So there will be a very strong effort to keep the alliance together. The question is, can it survive without Ghosn?
Dave, many thanks indeed for joining us. Dave McCombs reporting from Tokyo.
The Chief Justice of India has expressed anguish at a news article that had earlier claimed to have gained access to CBI Chief Alok Verma's sealed response. Justice Gogoi, who is heading the two-judge bench, pulled up Verma's counsel, Fali Nariman, asking him how such a sensitive document could have been leaked. Arpan Chaturvedi joining us with the details of what transpired in court. Arpan.
That's right, Ira. So, as we know, Chief Justice Gogoi has been very well known for his no-nonsense image. And today, when the case was actually, when the court was supposed to hear on the main matter, which is Alok Verma being sent and challenge to that, the Chief Justice made very clear that he's not going to hear any of those arguments until sorted out.
Trouble listening. We'll try and get back to Arpan in a bit, but let's talk about politics. It's the second phase of polling with 72 assembly seats in Chhattisgarh. Voter turnout has been more than 25% till noon, that is. In the fray are over 1,000 candidates, including the state's first Chief Minister Ajit Jogi. Here's a look at what else is at stake in this phase of polling. Out of time on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Lots more coming up on Bloomberg Quint.